The furnace hummed like it might quit any second when my dad looked up from the lease papers and said, "Pay rent by next month or you're out." I'm Lyle Corbin, 55, a worn-out internal controller staring at his own Montclair pen, catching the cold glare of a flickering kitchen light. Ever had your family turn your home into a ledger line? The furnace hummed in the background, its low, uneven drone, filling the silence as if it were buying me time to think. My father didn't give me any. His words landed like a gavel in that dim kitchen. Pay rent by next month, or you're out. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. My hand hovered over the Montclair pen lying on the table, the same pen he'd given me when I got my first job balancing books for a small manufacturer downtown, a gesture of pride back then. Now, under the dull glare of a winter afternoon, it felt heavier, colder, like it knew I was about to write myself into a corner. The cedar walls of the old house carried the faint scent of burnt wood from the fireplace, stubbornly clinging to the curtains despite the draft that crept in around the windows. The heater clicked and coughed every few seconds, an imperfect metronome that made the tension somehow sharper. My mother sat across from me, her hands folded so tightly in her lap, I thought the knuckles might turn blue. Her eyes kept sliding away from mine, settling on the coffee mug in front of her, as though it might provide an escape. My father didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked in his hand, his posture as rigid as his tone. It's not personal, Lyle. The family trust has to remain balanced. Everyone has to contribute, and this is the fairest way. The word fair sounded foreign coming from him, like he was trying out a language he didn't speak fluently. He slid a typed amendment across the table, the corners perfectly aligned, his thumb pressing down just enough to make sure I couldn't ignore it. Before I could even take in the words, Vernon strolled in, casual as ever, his coffee steaming, like he'd just returned from a lazy Sunday stroll. "Don't look so shocked," he said, taking a long sip before leaning against the counter. "It's not like he's throwing you to the curb, little brother. Just keeping the books tidy." He gestured to the paper with his mug, a single drop of coffee threatening to spill onto the clean white margin. I almost wished it would just to stain something in this room that felt too pristine, too surgical. I traced the Montclair pen with my fingers, feeling the familiar grooves in the barrel. My father had handed it to me 25 years ago, the day I signed my first offer letter telling me a good pen makes every decision feel important. Never sign in haste. Back then, the weight of it had felt reassuring. Today, it felt like lead in my hand, a quiet warning I wasn't sure I could heed. The amendment's language was clinical, stripped of any warmth. Tenant agrees to remit rent payments beginning March 1st as a condition of continued occupancy. Failure to comply may result in eviction or reallocation of trust assets. I read it twice, the words blurring slightly as my pulse quickened. Tenant, not son, not family, just another line item on Gareth Corbin's balance sheet. "Dad, when did we start turning this house into a ledger entry?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Since when am I a liability instead of a son?" The heater clicked again, louder this time, as if punctuating the silence that followed. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but she shut them quickly, her gaze falling back to the mug. "Since this trust became our only way to keep the estate solvent," Gareth said flatly. "You're not the only one contributing here. Vernon's been covering property taxes for years." Vernon smirked, swirling his coffee like it was proof of sainthood. I looked down at the signature line. My hand trembled as I uncapped the Montclair pen, its nib catching a glint of the pale winter sun filtering through the window. Each letter I traced felt like a scar, a mark I couldn't undo. The pen scratched softly against the paper, its weight dragging my name across the page while my chest tightened. Halfway through, a faint draft slid across the back of my neck, rattling the kitchen window. The cold sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. When I finished, I let the pen rest beside the stack of papers, the ink still drying. My father took the amendment without a word, sliding it back into his leather folder. Vernon drained the last of his coffee, setting the mug down with a hollow clink. "Welcome to adulthood, Lyle," he said lightly, as if this were some kind of initiation rite. He left the room humming under his breath, a tune too cheerful for the mood. I stayed seated, my eyes drawn to the header, printed neatly at the top of the page I'd just signed, Amendment to Family Trust Lease. The words felt colder than the draft, still teasing the back of my neck. This wasn't just about paying rent. This was something bigger. Something with fine print I hadn't yet read but already felt pressing down on me like the weight of that pen in my pocket. The basement office always had a heaviness to it, a kind of stale air that clung to your clothes long after you climbed the stairs. That morning, early in the pale wash of spring light, the air felt thicker, tinged with something sour, like the smell of damp paper mixed with oil from the boiler that hummed and hissed in the corner. I tugged the string on the overhead fluorescent light, and it flickered twice before buzzing to life, casting a cold, uneven glow across the room. On the battered desk, a manila envelope waited, as though it had been planted there for me. Tenant Records, Corbin Trust, was stamped on the label in bold, uncompromising type, and my name was printed right beneath, just as large. My stomach sank before I even touched it. On the upper corner, a faint brown ring had seeped into the cardboard, a coffee stain familiar and telling. Vernon's calling card. I traced the ring with my finger, already hearing his casual tone in my head, the same tone he used when he reminded me last month to start acting like an adult while sipping his third cup of the morning. I slid the envelope open, the flap making a sound like a sigh, and drew out a stack of neatly aligned documents. The boiler hissed again, louder this time, as if to echo my unease. The papers inside weren't just receipts or notices. They were statements of intent. My name appeared again and again, underlined and bold labeled as tenant. There was no mention of son sibling or any familial tie, just tenant like I'd signed away blood and bone for a slot on their spreadsheet. I shuffled through the stack, each page stiffer than the last, until a folded email printout slipped free and landed at my feet. The paper was crisp, the ink sharp and unblotted, like it had been freshly printed and conveniently misplaced. I crouched to pick it up the floor, cold even through my socks. The email header was between Vernon and Gareth, the subject line blunt quick sale options, occupant liability. My name was listed halfway down the page, not as a beneficiary or stakeholder, but as a problem to resolve a liability attached to the house, like a line item waiting to be erased. I read it twice, the words feeling heavier with each pass. The fluorescent light above me buzzed louder, a subtle hum that seemed to grow every time I uncovered another piece of their quiet plan. Looking for something. Vernon's voice rolled in from the doorway, calm, casual, but with an edge as sharp as the corners of the files in my hand. He stepped down the creaking wooden stairs, his polished shoes incongruous with the grimy floor. "You know," he said, leaning against the filing cabinet like he owned the room, "Dad's serious about that rent. It's not a suggestion. If you can't keep up, we'll have to make other arrangements." His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me, and he smiled, small and tight. "Trust paperwork doesn't bend, Lyle." My grip tightened on the email. "Since when am I a liability in my own family's home?" The boiler clunked in the corner, as if punctuating my question with its own grim note. Vernon didn't answer right away. He just straightened, smoothed the lapel of his blazer, and nodded toward the desk. Since the trust became the only thing holding this place together. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Behind him, at the top of the stairs, Maribel appeared like a ghost, her hands clutching something small and folded. Her eyes darted between us, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. When Vernon's phone buzzed in his pocket and he glanced away, she descended the first few steps quickly and pressed a note into my palm. Her fingers trembled, cool and dry. I felt the faint scratch of her penmanship through the thin paper. Find your own footing before they take it from you. She opened her mouth to say more, but a shadow filled the stairwell. Gareth's figure loomed behind her, silent but solid. His hand reached forward and plucked the note from mine as easily as pulling a thread. He didn't even look at me. He just pocketed it and guided Maribel back upstairs with a hand on her shoulder. She didn't look back, and I couldn't read her face as she disappeared around the corner. The room felt colder when they left the hum of the fluorescent light, now a constant whine. I turned back to the desk, rifling through the envelope again, looking for something I could use, some piece of leverage or clarity. My fingers brushed against another envelope, buried under the stack, thicker than the rest. As I pulled it free, the red stamp on the front stood out immediately, County Recorder's Office. My pulse quickened. It had weight, literal and otherwise. If this was a copy of the deed, maybe it held the answers, or another lock I couldn't yet pick. From behind me, Vernon's voice floated up the stairs as he moved toward the door. Each word deliberate, meant to stick. Clock's ticking, little brother. Trust paperwork doesn't wait. His footsteps faded into the house above, leaving me alone with the boiler's hiss, the cold documents, and that unopened envelope burning a hole in my hand. The Rusty Bean Cafe was one of those places that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The wooden tables were etched with initials and faint rings from mugs long vanished. The chalkboard menu slightly smudged from years of quick hands rewriting prices. It smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement drifting in from the open door, a scent that felt almost comforting after the stale basement air I'd been breathing for weeks. Soft jazz crackled faintly from a wall-mounted speaker, the notes occasionally warping, as if the ancient wiring couldn't quite keep up. It was the kind of place where voices softened, as though every conversation deserved the quiet dignity of low tones and steaming coffee. Reuben Ashford sat by the window, his gray hair combed back in neat lines, his suit jacket folded on the chair beside him. When I approached, he glanced up from his cup, the corners of his eyes creasing into a smile. His voice was calm and steady, even over the gentle clinking of mugs around us. "Still carrying that Montclair pen, huh?" he said, nodding to where it peeked from my shirt pocket. "Careful, it'll crack if it hits tile. They don't make them to survive drops." He said it lightly, but the warning sat in the air like a thread connecting more than just the pen. I slid into the seat across from him, feeling the wood creak beneath me. The rain had left the streets outside slick and dark, and every few minutes, a passing car sent reflections from the streetlights dancing across the cafe walls. I took a sip of the coffee the waitress had set down for me, a bit too strong, slightly bitter, but grounding. "You sounded urgent on the phone," I said, my voice low. "I think Vernon and my father are setting something in motion. There's talk of a quick sale, and I found an email calling me an occupant liability." Reuben nodded slowly, taking in every word with that patient air I remembered from our years working side by side at Corbin Manufacturing before retirement had made him more of a sounding board than a colleague. It doesn't surprise me he said, his tone calm but edged with something firm. Trusts can be designed to protect assets, but they can also be twisted to corner someone, especially if the people pulling the strings know the right loopholes. He set his cup down carefully, aligning it perfectly with its saucer. You need to start treating this like a project, not a family spat. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, even as the jazz shifted into a softer saxophone line. Gather everything. Every email chain between them, every receipt that shows where the trust money's going, even conversations. If you can record without breaking any laws, do it. Duplicate everything and keep it off-site. Quietly. The less they know you're aware, the better. I nodded, watching a drop of rain slide down the glass behind him, leaving a streak like a timeline I didn't ask for. And in the meantime, I asked, I can't just keep sitting there while they tighten the screws. Reuben reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp ivory business card. The lettering was simple, black deliberate. Her name's Dana Kersey. Estate attorney sharp as they come, doesn't flinch when things get messy. Call her. But don't you sign a single document, Lyle. Not an addendum, not an acknowledgement, nothing. Not until she's looked it over. This trust smells off, and if you're not careful, they'll box you in completely. I turned the card over in my hand, the edges smooth, the weight of it, oddly reassuring. The Montclair pen nudged against my chest as I slipped the card into my pocket, a reminder of every signature I'd made in good faith that now felt like a trap. A loud splash from outside made me jump slightly. A city bus barreled through a puddle, sending a wave of water up against the cafe window. Reuben chuckled softly, his laugh like a low hum. Jumpier than you used to be, he said, shaking his head. Time to steady your hand, Lyle. People who want to corner you count on your nerves betraying you. Don't give them that. For the first time in weeks, I let out a slow breath and felt a sliver of calm settle in my chest. Reuben's voice, the smell of the rain, the soft scrape of the chair legs as someone left 2 tables over, it all pulled me into the moment. Thanks, Reuben, I murmured. Feels like you're the only one not tallying my life on a spreadsheet. When I finally stepped back into the cool air of the street, the drizzle had stopped, but the pavement still glistened, reflecting the neon sign above the cafe. I drove back in silence, gripping the wheel just a little tighter than usual. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the house loomed in its usual quiet, but there was a shadow leaning casually against the fence. Vernon straightened as my headlights swept over him, his hands sliding into his coat pockets. Downtown meeting, huh? He called as I stepped out of the car, his voice deceptively casual, though his eyes narrowed. Who'd you see? The kitchen felt colder than usual, though the oven had been on for hours reheating a casserole. The neon ceiling light buzzed faintly, its uneven hum cutting through the quiet thrum of the dishwasher in the corner. A cracked window let in a thin draft that slid across my ankles, carrying with it the faint, tired scent of leftover roast beef from dinner. The table between us, once a place for Sunday breakfasts and birthday candles, had turned into a sterile conference table where everything was measured in percentages and clauses. My Montclair pen rested by my plate, its glass barrel glinting beneath the artificial light like it didn't belong here any more than I did. Vernon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him like a man preparing to deliver bad news at a board meeting. You should know, he began, his tone deliberate and practiced. The trust has a clause that doesn't bend. If a tenant is delinquent even by a single month, all rights are forfeited. Permanently. He didn't blink as he said it, his eyes fixed on mine, searching for a reaction he could file away. Beside him, Maribel sat stiff, her hands twisted together beneath the table, her eyes darting between us as though she could somehow hold both sides together by sheer will. Gareth, looming at the head of the table with his usual stillness, finally spoke his voice like gravel. "It's just business, Lyle. No one's singling you out. The trust is the trust. You either meet your obligations or we move forward without you." He glanced at Vernon, then back at me, the implication hanging heavier than the stale air in the room. Maribel's lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't we find another way? This isn't—" Her words dissolved as Gareth's hand rose slightly, a silent command for quiet. Her gaze fell to her lap, shoulders curling inward, and she said nothing more. Something inside me, that last thin strand of hope that maybe this could be smoothed over, snapped. The quiet fury I'd been suppressing, feeding quietly with every receipt, every printed email, every whispered conversation I'd stored away, rose like a slow tide. My hand, almost on instinct, slammed against the edge of the table, the sound sharp in the sterile room. The Montclair pen jolted, rolled across the wood, and tumbled over the edge. It struck the tile with a brittle crack, the glass barrel splintering. A ribbon of black ink bled from the seam, curling along the grout like a slow-moving vein. When I bent to retrieve it, the ink smeared across my fingers, cold and slick, coating my skin in a stain I couldn't shake. I stared at my hand, watching the ink pool in my palm. It spread in uneven patterns, seeping into the lines of my skin like a quiet brand. Above me, the neon light's hum seemed to swell, buzzing louder, like the house itself was taking sides, casting its judgment through every flicker and vibration. Vernon rose, adjusting his jacket, his shoes clicking softly against the tile as he moved toward the hall. "Deadlines don't wait," he said over his shoulder, his voice as casual as if we'd just discussed a grocery list. "Make sure you're not delinquent, Lyle. You know the consequences." His footsteps faded down the corridor, each one echoing faintly against the walls, until only the hum of the light and the faint hiss of the draft remained. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice not to crack the way the pen had. Instead, I pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my pocket, a list of dates, payments, and transcribed notes I'd been compiling in secret. Each line was a reminder that I wasn't just sitting here absorbing their terms. I was building my own case, quietly stacking the scales for the moment they least expected it. The ink on my hand had dried into a tacky sheen, my fingertips tinged with black as I placed the broken pen on the counter. The neon above flickered once a brief stutter before resuming its steady buzz. It felt less like a light and more like a warning siren no one else could hear. Across the counter, my phone vibrated the screen, casting a small glow on the laminate surface. An email notification slid into view, the subject line, stark against the dark background, legal loophole call tonight. My thumb hovered above the screen, my pulse sinking with the faint hum in the air as I read the words again. For the first time in months, the cold draft felt less like a chill and more like a push forward. The hallway was steeped in a kind of stillness that felt alive, like it was holding its breath alongside me. Only the soft glow from a single sconce painted faint, slanted shadows across the cedar walls, and in that silence, the hallway clock's steady tick grew louder, each beat a reminder that something was about to snap. My hand wrapped tighter around the cold banister fingertips, pressing into the wood's grooves as my father's voice floated up from the den below. "List it before winter." he said, calm and final, his words cutting through the air like they were meant for an audience of one. Lyle's a tenant. He can be moved out. The faint smell of varnished wood and old cigarette smoke drifted up from the den, clinging to the edges of every shadow like a memory that refused to fade. I leaned closer to the railing, careful not to let my shoes scuff against the runner. The conversation below wasn't meant for me, but every word carried in the thin winter air. I could make out the gentle clink of ice in a glass, followed by Vernon's chuckle, a low, smug sound that always managed to crawl under my skin. "I'll handle the paperwork," Vernon said, his tone smooth, confident, like this was nothing more than another Tuesday evening. "We'll file a quick sale petition with the trust and adjust his lease status. Call it a clerical correction. No judge is going to look twice. He'll be a non-entity on the ledger before he even realizes what's happened." The clock ticked again, a sound so sharp it almost masked my pulse hammering in my ears. My other hand slipped into my jacket pocket, brushing against my phone. I eased it out slowly, the fabric of my coat whispering as I moved. I tapped the screen once, dimmed the brightness, and swiped to record. The phone's tiny red dot blinked like a heartbeat in the dark, a silent witness to the voices below. They were laughing now, soft but unmistakable. Gareth's voice, cool and steady, cut through Vernon's smugness. He's still clinging to that cracked Montclair pen like it means something. Sentiment doesn't pay taxes, and it sure as hell won't save him. Their laughter blended low and indulgent, like they were already sharing the spoils of a house I still called home. I felt the railings chill seep into my fingers as I shifted my weight, angling closer to catch every word. Each detail, every phrase about clerical corrections and non-entity status was another nail in the coffin they were building for me. But with every line my phone captured, I felt something in me harden. The quiet collection of receipts and whispers was no longer about survival. It was ammunition, and tonight they were handing me the final pieces. Vernon's voice rose slightly, edged with a satisfaction he didn't bother to mask. "Once he's gone, we'll finally have breathing room. No more tiptoeing around deadlines or waiting for him to scrape together his part. We can actually start turning this property into something useful." He punctuated the statement with a low laugh, one I'd heard too many times at too many family dinners, a sound that always seemed to signal a deal struck in someone else's favor. The clock ticked again, louder like a metronome for betrayal. I eased back a step, my phone still recording my heart syncing with the steady, damning rhythm. And then it happened. A sound that sliced through the layered whispers and ticking the faint, unmistakable creak of the stair beneath my foot. I froze, every muscle tightening as my breath caught in my throat. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, stretching longer across the walls. Below, their voices went silent for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I stayed perfectly still, the clock ticking on each second, daring me to breathe, waiting to see if they would look up and find me standing there, the quiet observer who'd just become the most dangerous person in their house. My hotel desk looked less like a workspace and more like a command post. Email printouts were stacked in precise columns, screenshots of trust ledgers glowed from my laptop screen, and the audio file I'd captured just days ago pulsed with a soft red icon in the corner, ready to play at a moment's notice. Beside it all lay my yellow legal pad, scrawled with numbers and notes in my uneven handwriting, and my cracked Montclair pen resting across the top like a quiet sentinel. The glass barrel was fractured, a faint seam running along its length, but its weight still felt steady in my hand. The heater hummed faintly behind me, a soft white noise against the muted sounds of the city outside. My coffee, cold and bitter, now sat near the edge of the desk, leaving a dark ring on the paper coaster beneath it. Reuben's voice crackled through the speaker of my phone, steady and low.
"They think you're cornered, Lyle,"
he said, with a patience that grounded me despite the knots in my chest.
"That's your advantage.
When people are certain they've boxed you in, they stop looking for exits. That's when you build your own door." Ms. Dana Kersey, sitting across from me with her laptop balanced on her knees, nodded in quiet agreement. Her glasses reflected the glow from my screen, her expression calm and deliberate. "We don't need a fight in court," she said, her voice even clipped. "We just need them to believe that a fight is inevitable if they don't cooperate. The fraudulent amendments, the emails, the recorded conversation about falsifying your lease status, they don't stand a chance against this in front of a judge. But we'll let them do the math themselves." I flipped through my notes, each page a testament to months of quiet work. Every receipt I'd duplicated, every email I'd forwarded to an off-site drive, every ledger line Vernon and Gareth had conveniently adjusted to benefit the trust at my expense, it was all there. HOA fees buried in miscellaneous charges, property taxes billed twice, trust income funneled toward consultation fees that always seemed to land in Vernon's account. Piece by piece, I'd turned their casual exploitation into a damning trail of evidence. My pen tapped lightly against the legal pad as I tallied the totals, the numbers stark against the yellow paper. Kersey leaned forward, her hands steepled. "Tomorrow we call them in. No threats. Just show them what we have, and let the silence do the work. They'll understand that handing over the deed quietly is cheaper than having this blow up in probate court." Reuben chuckled softly on the line, a sound that broke through my tension for a moment.
"I always said you had a knack for balancing ledgers, Lyle. Guess you just needed the right motivation."
That night I slept only in fragments, the heater's hum, a constant lull, and the shadows from the desk lamp etched into my dreams. By morning, I felt less like a son meeting his family and more like a client about to close a negotiation. When Gareth and Vernon walked into the rented conference room, Kersey had arranged its beige walls and 2 bright fluorescent lights, making the air feel thinner. They carried themselves like men expecting to dictate terms. That confidence dimmed when Kersey slid a slim binder across the table. Inside were neatly organized pages, the email printouts, the screenshots, the ledger summaries. On top, a transcript of the recorded conversation, every damning word highlighted in neat yellow. Vernon's smirk faltered. First, his fingers twitching at the edge of the binder. Gareth remained stone-faced, but his jaw tightened as he skimmed the pages. Neither spoke for nearly 2 minutes. The only sound, the faint hum of the overhead lights, and the quiet scrape of paper. Finally, Gareth exhaled slowly, his eyes moving from Kersey to me.
"What do you want?"
I met his gaze, calm, my voice low but clear.
"The deed.
Today. And a signed release stating the trust has no further claim or lien. Or we walk into probate court and you can explain this to a judge." Vernon glanced at Gareth, waiting for some kind of pushback, but none came. After a long silence, Gareth gave a single curt nod.
"Fine. Get the papers."
The agreement was drawn up within the hour, Kersey overseeing every detail. When it was time to sign, I reached for my pen, the Montclair still cracked but functional. The weight of it was solid in my hand, the ink flowing smoothly across the page despite the fracture in its barrel. Each loop of my signature felt deliberate final, as if I were closing more than just a legal transaction. As I capped the pen, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. A text from Gareth appeared on the screen, brief and sharp.
"You'll regret tearing this family apart."
The message sat there, the words cold and heavy, but I didn't reply. I simply slipped the phone face down on the desk and looked at the ink drying on the signature line, steady and unbroken, even if the pen itself bore scars. The Montclair pen sat in a velvet-lined tray, gleaming under the warm light of Cooper's Repair and Antiques. Its glass barrel had been replaced with a slightly thicker polished casing, clear enough to show the ink inside, but with a quiet strength in its new curve. The brass clip shone with fresh polish, and when Reuben picked it up and handed it to me, the smell of oiled wood and old leather hung in the air, like memory suspended in time. "Stronger now," he said with a nod, his fingers lingering on mine for just a second longer than needed. "Sometimes the break makes it better." He stepped back, letting me turn the pen over in my hand. It felt familiar and foreign at once, lighter in spirit, but solid grounded, the kind of weight you chose to carry, not the kind that dragged you down. Mr. Cooper, the shop's owner, leaned against the counter, a cloth still in his hands. "Not every day we get something that dramatic," he said, smiling under his graying mustache. "Most folks just want their clocks to tick again. Yours came with stories in the ink." He gave a soft chuckle and turned away to ring up a customer, leaving us in a quiet pocket of peace among ticking mantelpieces and the scent of brass polish. The lease agreement for the church workshop sat on the small desk by the window, the sunlight filtering through a lace curtain and pooling right across the signature line. I took the pen's cap off, slowly clicked it into place at the top, and signed my name with a deliberate grace I hadn't felt in years. The ink flowed smoothly. No sputters, no hesitation, just a clean, dark line that cut across paper like a declaration. Reuben watched me, arms crossed, eyes soft. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "sometimes the strongest thing you can do is teach others what nearly broke you. That's how you keep it from owning you." He reached over and tapped the lease. "This isn't about money anymore. Not for you. It's about building something that doesn't require someone else's permission." I let the pen rest on the paper for a moment longer before placing it gently in my inside coat pocket. It didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a key. Outside, the shop bell jingled as we stepped into the street. The air was warmer than I expected. Late spring in Toledo had arrived without fanfare, but with a quiet bloom of life. A soft breeze carried the scent of lilacs from a yard nearby, the kind of smell that made you pause without realizing why. Dust swirled gently in the sunlight, and the world felt still, not stuck, not paused, just still, like it had finally made room for me. We walked without hurry down the sidewalk past shuttered storefronts and a bakery just setting out trays of warm bread. My pace had changed no longer, marching towards something or away from something else. Just walking. Reuben didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His presence had always been more anchor than instruction, and today I didn't need answers. Just space. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the sun. An email from Ms. Kersey. Subject update: property liquidation confirmed. I didn't open it right away. The information would still be there when I was ready, but the moment I was in the scent of lilac, the glide of a pen, the soft jingle of a shop door was already slipping through the hourglass. And for once, I didn't want to miss it. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of St. Albans Community Hall, warming the polished wood floor and the tray of donuts I'd set out by the coffee urn. The scent of fresh brew and powdered sugar hung in the air, mixing with the soft murmur of early arrivals and the distant toll of church bells. For the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest, no trust papers, no deadlines, just a quiet steadiness. On the table, my Montclair pen lay across an open ledger, the sunlight catching its restored glass barrel. It felt less like a tool and more like a marker, a quiet emblem of something I'd finally reclaimed control over my own life. I greeted the group neighbors, retirees, a few young families, and Reuben, standing off to the side, gave me a slight encouraging nod. I began simply. Most of us were told to trust the systems around us, family contracts, promises. But sometimes, those systems break us. This workshop is about building your own so no one writes your story for you. The words came out softer than I expected, but the faces watching me seemed to understand. Near the back, 15-year-old Eli shuffled forward, a shy smile tugging at his face. He handed me a folded drawing, me standing in front of a small brick building, Montclair pen in hand, the words, "Uncle Lyle's new home," arched above. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just pinned it on the corkboard next to the workshop schedule, the push-pin clicking softly as the morning sun brightened the paper. When class ended, I stepped outside. The breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs from a nearby garden, the air cool but easy in my lungs. I looked up at the pale spring sky, felt the sun warm my face, and thought to myself, quietly, This feels like home. As I left St. Albans, the late sun cast a soft gold over the old brick walls, and the Montclair pen restored and steady rested in my pocket, like a quiet reminder that what breaks can be made whole again. This journey taught me that justice isn't just about legal wins, but about reclaiming your voice and peace of mind. Sometimes bridges have to collapse so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. Whether it's a layoff, a divorce, or a deep loss, there's always a road to something new if we're willing to take the first step. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise?